Welcome to our telecast today and to this week of programming where we are focusing on the stories of Jesus. Some call it the parables of Jesus. And my guest is Dr. Brian Stiller. He is the global ambassador of the World Evangelical Alliance. Good to have you here, Brian.
Nice to be back, Peter.
Yes, and you're going to help us get insights on various parables each day. And so we're going to get to that in just a moment. You'll not want to miss this because, you know, Jesus is so famous for his parables, and yet the word parable maybe has lost its meaning to us. What we talk about all of that, and then you're going to get something really, really worthwhile. I want to just give you a few points of information. First of all, we want to hear from you. You see the information there on the bottom of the screen, and you will see it throughout this whole program. You can text me. I love when you send me a text message. We have a phone that's dedicated to receive those messages. And then, of course, you can call the Grace Prayer Center. Unless you're calling in the middle of the night, there's somebody there answering your call. And if we're busy, please leave your contact information and we'll call you right back. And you'll talk to one of our prayer ministers there. And then, of course, you can also email me. We love to hear from you. I want to say to you that many of you, we've just come off a campaign of 50 days of reaching out to unreached people groups, and it's been phenomenal. We gave you the report last week, but I just want to say go to our website for all the updates about our missions outreach to the world, and because you're a part of it, and we thank you for everybody who has helped us with that. Also, we are releasing a new teaching here that you're going to hear about over the next 3-4 weeks, the mind of Christ. Many people today in our country feel like they are under a mental attack for many reasons. One of them being what we have experienced the last year and a half in our country of restrictions, but there's a constant battle for our mind, and God has something to say about that. And so you'll also see that advertised from time to time. But now let me turn my attention to you, Brian. So it's been a little while since you were with us last time. We did some great programs about when life hurts. And then you shared with me that you'd also spent some time studying the parables of Jesus. Let me just ask you right up front, well, what is a parable? How do you describe it? Well, what is it?
Well, first, it's a story. It's a story that Jesus used. Parables are particular to Jesus. The scholars have understood that Jesus is the only one that really gives what we call a parable. There is a parable in the Old Testament, and it's the parable of David who has violated both his neighbor and one of his senior military leaders, has him killed. Naaman the prophet comes to him and tells him a story of a man who has power in the community who robs the best lamb from a neighbor. And David says, we're going to get that man. And Naaman the prophet said, you're the man. That's the only parable in the old story, in the Old Testament. Now, the parables are stories, but the uniqueness of a parable and the reason that Jesus is the only one that's regarded as being the one who has given parables is the ability of Jesus in the telling of the story to involve me, the reader, the listener. And so when we listen to the parable, inevitably I'm drawn into the story itself. If I'm not drawn into it, it's a story, but it's not a parable. So a parable is unique in that it's a story that God uses to tell me something. Mm-hmm. But in the story, I, as the listener, am brought in, and I am part of the story. So it's a very unique weaving of a story that includes me, the listener.
And very often, as in any good story, there's an unexpected ending. I can think, just flashing through my mind right now, how Jesus actually draws the listener in, and then he ends up bringing a truth they weren't expecting to get.
That's often the case. In fact, 3 of the 4 parables that we're dealing with this week have that unexpected surprise that comes out of the blue. The first one we're dealing with here doesn't so much have a surprise as it does have a surprise interpretation. So when we read the text, as we will in a moment, there is the last line that Jesus gives is shocking. We say, well, Jesus, why are you being so severe? But that's a way to get us to hear what he is trying to give in the parable.
In other words, Stay tuned the whole time, because we may think we know what the parable is saying, and often tradition has interpreted it in a way that is not so shocking, maybe.
That's right.
And then the shock comes. And so today, what is the parable we're going to focus on today?
We're dealing with the talents. Jesus tells a story about a landowner going away. And while he's going away, he gives his workers, 3 of them, a certain amount of money. One's 5 talent, the other's 3 talent, the other's 1 talent. Now, 5 talents is a lot of money. It's $3 million. So it's a significant amount of money. When he comes back, he wants them to have invested the money so that he has a return when he comes back. And so the story folds around that.
Now, I'm going to read that story. It's kind of a lengthy story, so I'll read about 2/3 of it, give you the gist. I'm going to ask you, Brian, to go over to our preaching set, and then you're going to have 10 minutes uninterrupted by yours truly. Just pour it on into the cameras over there. I'll let you go, and when I'm done this reading, I'll turn it over to you, all right?
All right.
And so Brian is heading over to our preaching set. So I'm reading from Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one, he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and then to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. And then we drop down a few verses there to verse 24. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seeds. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that I would, when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where they will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Over to you, Brian.
If I ask you to help me list the deadliest of sins, what would you include? Most of us would begin with those noted in the 10 Commandments and then add a few more. But how many of us would include failing to use the potential God has given each of us? That is why this parable is so surprising. Not that we doubt that God cares about we handle what he's given to us, but that it matters so much. Why is Jesus so harsh on the one who hides his investment money? Remember, the 5 talents would be worth about $3 million today. Do you hear the judgment of Jesus? Here's what he said. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh my goodness, Jesus. This servant doesn't give the money away as a bribe. He's not using it for a good time. He didn't pay off his mortgage. Instead, he simply protects it until the king returns. And what does he get for seeming a rather modest error of judgment? Throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But why, Jesus? Why does this invoke such a ferocious outburst from you as you tell the story? Does it mean we'll go to hell if we don't invest what God has given us? Well, before we run off and start a new church that teaches that we get into heaven by our good works, let's carefully examine the text to see what Jesus is saying. Remember, throughout the Bible, there's an underlying understanding that God sees what we do. After Jesus' resurrection, he ascends back to the Father with the promise that he'll return. Though we have been given much, we are warned not to take it for granted. Just as at work we are evaluated, so God evaluates us today and every day and on that final judgment day. So this idea of accountability that Jesus presents to his disciples is not new. Note particularly that this story is not for the religious leaders or for the crowds, but for the disciples, those who live with him every day. Jesus wants those ones to hear how tough and demanding God really is. If you're a Christian who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, and if you trust in his death and resurrection as the payment for the sin, then this story is for you. For when we come to Christ in faith, a new life is born in us. One of the results of that new life is that someday we will live forever with Jesus. But there's another aspect to being his follower. We now understand that he invests in us his life by the gift of his Son and by the Spirit who lives in us. We now have a responsibility to live out the life of his in the world. You may not see yourself as a Billy Graham or Mother Teresa, but that doesn't mean that in God's eyes you aren't as important. One of the three levels of investment in this parable, you may not see yourself as the 5-talent or even the 3-talent person. Regardless, to each of us, God gives something of value to be used for him. There is a danger that we think about accountability, we believe that we will face it only in the future. We reason this way: because Jesus' return is in the future, my time of accountability will only be then. Not so. Here's the paradox. While it's true that Jesus is returning to earth in the future, he's already here. So being judged or being held accountable is something that is going on all the time. Today, Jesus holds me accountable for the use I make of his gifting today. It isn't only a matter of some future time, it's happening every day. God keeps short accounts. An important question you may ask is, what has God placed in me that matters so much to him? If I'm going to be judged on how I use these talents, wouldn't it be helpful to know what he's talking about? Here's a sampling of what some of those gifts may be. The tough issue in this parable is to figure out what Jesus is saying to the third servant who buries his money. Why those harsh and damning words, throw out that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let's start by looking at what Jesus does not mean. First, he is not saying that if our investment fails, we'll be thrown into a place of damnation. His words, throw out that worthless servant outside into darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, is a way of saying, get out of here. Second, Jesus is not saying that how we manage our gifts is to be equated with acceptance into his kingdom. Such entrance is based on his love for us, not on our good works. Jesus is not speaking here to the unconverted. He is speaking to his disciples. This tough love message is for those who follow him, those who are willing to leave all to serve him. Having noted what Jesus did not mean, then what is he saying? He begins by congratulating his people on their good work. In today's currency, the equivalent amount the king entrusts to the servant is close to 3 million. And when the king returns from his travels and sees his servant has increased his capital, he is excited and puts him in charge of a large enterprise, saying, come and share your master's happiness. He then looks at the second servant who also doubled his investment and gives the same congratulations. Both people, though given different amounts, are congratulated. What did they do? We don't know if one had more experience with investments or is better educated. All we know is that they are given a significant amount of cash and told to invest it. They take a risk, make good investments, and by so doing are rewarded. The third servant is unwilling to take a risk and hides the money. When asked why, he simply says he was afraid. Then he offers an excuse that is against his king. He defends his actions by reminding the king that he knows his boss takes from places he's not invested. And so he hides the money. This argument is weak, having no connection to his veiled accusation. The king doesn't defend or excuse himself. He just says that if that is true, then the least the servant should have done was to deposit the money and at least add interest to the principal. This parable challenges the play it safe mentality. The danger with the church being led today by baby boomers is that our reflex becomes more and more for self-protection, to make sure that in the last few years of ministry we will end well. While it's good to live out our final years of ministry in faithful Christ-honoring service, the danger is that our vision is determined by our ability to achieve, and our goals are written to ensure success. Jesus points out that we are not to operate out of fear but faith. There is always the danger of failure. Investing in a project, a stock, an invention or service does not mean one is guaranteed success. However, the nature of faith is to risk, not to be cautious. In God's upside-down economy, failure is due not to one being prudent, but to an unwillingness to take a risk. The scriptures tell of those who risked in faith. What if Abraham had been careful of leaving the lands of his parents in response to God's call? Or if Moses had been reluctant to lead the people of God into the promised land? Remember Peter? If it is you, Lord, ask me to come on the water. Jesus replies, come. And Peter steps out of the boat. When we hide a talent in the ground, it's like putting faith in a drawer for safekeeping. We take it out Sunday morning and display our symbol of faith in sacramental liturgy for an hour or so, maybe even adding some polish. Then before afternoon football or golf, we put it back in the drawer as if it had nothing to do with how we live the rest of the week. To such behavior, Jesus says, get out of my sight, and gives the buried talent to the risk taker. Listen to what the third servant said in response to the king. Yes, sir, I give back to you what was given. It's all here, 100%, not a cent is missing. You see, I know, sir, I know that you grab anything in sight you take from crops in which you didn't invest one seed. You not only are smart, but you're also tough. Knowing this, I said to myself, self, walk carefully. Keep track of every red cent he's given you. So I did what any careful accountant would do. I made sure every cent was in place when you returned. I didn't take one mina for myself. See, it's all here. The master responds, look, Abdullah, when I invited you into a partnership with me, I knew your track record on investments. I trusted you. I gave you money to invest because I knew you had the ability to make good on it. I wasn't saying you had to make more. I was asking you to try and make more. I know that there are no guarantees with investing. There is always a risk of failure, but no risk, no success. You either use it or lose it. I was asking you to take a risk and you let me down. You played it safe. There's an awful consequence for those who bury the opportunities of faith. But why does it matter so much? What is there about God's kingdom that calls us to risk-taking? The antithesis of faith is unfaith, like an uncola. We have a choice to live in faith, believing that God has both called us and equipped us for his service, or to live without faith outside Christ's kingdom. The focus message of this parable is that faith will be examined in judgment, which leads us to the question, are we willing to trust in the potential of his gifts, even to the point of risk? This risking in faith is not a function of one's personality type. One need not be a type A personality to be a risk taker. Neither is it the same as investing in the stock market or going out on a limb. Rather, it's trusting in the Holy Spirit to empower us in opportunities that come our way. Unfaith, or the cautious side of faith, may rise from a need to be respectable. Radical faith is associated with those on the cultural fringe, but as such groups move up the socioeconomic ladder, they downplay their strengths to gain respect and acceptance. Church history is replete with stories of groups that have gone this route and fallen into the trap of using their gifts of faith, and by not using their unique gifts, they have lost their dynamic. In a very real sense, God needs us. To a critic who told Stradivarius, the great violin maker, that if God really wanted violins, he would have made them himself, Stradivarius responded, no, not even God could make my violins without Stradivarius. In a sense, he was right. It's not that God can't, for there's nothing that God can't do, but he created us humans to be his co-managers, to choose to have great violins made by great violin makers. And as you use it, your faith will grow. How much better is that than losing it?
Wow, there's a lot for us to think about right there. And Brian is coming back to the set, and I want to explore a little bit more with him about what talents might be. And the word that came into my mind as he was speaking was the word stewardship, to be a good steward, which is another word in the Bible. Now, in that parable, and I, in the reading of it, I cut it a little short, it says right there, after a long time, the master came back. And I was thinking about that, Brian. All these principles that you shared, we are all given time. Time is a great gift. And you gave a special word to the baby boomers, to use whatever time they had. So let me ask you, Brian, first of all, you're now, I'm sure you have many good years ahead of you, but when you look at your own talents, is there anything that, if you had preached that sermon when you were 25 years old, is there anything that you might have done different, or anything you could say to people there? How do I maximize the talent God has given to me?
What we are good at, what we are talented, what we are gifted with, sometimes takes a while for us to figure it out. So when I started out, I had a particular vision of what I thought I was called to do. And I worked hard at it, and I drove it, and I kept failing. Just kept failing. I was deeply disappointed. I didn't know what was wrong. And it took a series of circumstances and other people to help me understand that there are, in the gifting that comes to us by creation, by our training, family, experiences, and discipline, I discovered that I had some gifts that, for me, I had depreciated, I had ignored, I didn't want to use my life in those particular ways.
So in a sense, that even those times that seemed like a failure, a few years maybe that you put in going in a certain direction, they were not really a failure. They were not a waste of time, for sure. You probably needed to have the experience that this was not the right way, because all of us have all kinds of, ideas that we maybe need to have knocked out of us.
Absolutely. And see, it isn't a matter of me not using my gifts. The question is, am I attempting to work with what I know I now have? Am I exercising that? Am I risking? Am I pushing that out? So it doesn't matter what a person is gifted at. You may be a good car mechanic. You may have ability to teach children. Whatever the gift is, whatever you feel you are interested in doing now, exercise it. Push it forward. And in the process, God, by His Spirit, will then open doors that you never knew existed. And so I found in the first number of years of my ministry, in my view, I was failing. What I was doing, I was testing certain aspects of my own personality. I was learning things that I needed to learn for the long term. Even in my failings were leading to learning.
So it was not a waste of time at all. It was a time of learning. You had to go through that time.
How many light bulbs failed before a light bulb worked?
They say 10,000 times. I guess that's a proverbial. So there was a word there also for baby boomers. And I don't know if you're a baby boomer. I don't know quite where their borders go, but maybe you are. And to not just play it safe, because we're given time. You walk through a cemetery, you see a birth date, and you see a death date, and you see a dash. Imagine that little dash represents all the time we spent, all of our worries, all the things we went for. Well, I believe this message has challenged you, but don't be condemned about it. You still have time. If you say, I wish I would have heard this years ago, you have time right now. And so maximize the time, because we are accountable to God. And as Brian said, this is a message really for believers, people who have received something from God. We have one way that you can participate and be involved in touching the world with the gospel. Watch this.
We know who we are. We know our purpose, to pass on the love and mercy of Jesus Christ to others. We did not receive God's grace to keep it to ourselves, but to share it with the world. And we do more together than any one of us could do alone. We are the VIP family. Our high honor is to serve, to stand with other believers in faith, sacrifice, and compassion. We are old and young, male and female. We live in apartments and in private homes. Some of us just entered the workplace, and others are retired. We are widows or widowers. We are the VIP family. We live in big cities and rural towns. We work on farms and in retail. Some of us are professionals, some factory workers, some teachers, pilots, pastors, drivers, social workers, electricians and plumbers, home workers, and students. We are the VIP family. Most of all, we are co-workers with Jesus Christ in the greatest task ever given, to give the gospel to every person. We have provided follow-up for more than 17 million new believers. We have trained more than 375,000 pastors and leaders. We operate Bible schools on 3 continents. We broadcast the gospel through television, books, and tracts. We are the VIP family, and our work has just begun. Now, we invite you. Jesus needed the 12, the 70, and the 500. Paul had a team of co-workers, and you are needed in this great task to finish the assignment that Jesus gave, that every person will be able to hear and receive the gospel. If not now, then when? If not you, then who? Say yes today to join the VIP family. Call 416-745-1820 or go online, give.peteryoungren.org.
I appreciate Brian Stiller sharing that parable with us today. And as we come to the closing minute, to me, it strikes me that there's a warning in here, there's accountability in here. Time is a tremendous gift from God. And this phrase has always spoken to me. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came back to settle accounts. A long time. And so some people don't have a long life, but most of us will have a relatively long time span. Even compared to people in history, they had shorter lives than we do today. And so I want to say a thank you for you who are involved in the gospel. You say, I want to use my time here on earth to take the gospel to others, as you saw in that clip that we just showed you. If you can become a monthly partner sharing our VIP family, I say a big thank you to you. If you can share your very best gift at this time, thank you so very, very much. We appreciate you. And then remember, we have some free material. Our magazine is available to you. I hope that you receive that. Any day now, the next magazine should be off from the printing press, and she will ship it to you. And Brian Stiller, thank you very much. We'll be back again tomorrow, so don't miss it. You are loved.
Thank you. Your participation makes this global gospel ministry possible. To share your prayer request or to help bring the gospel to those who have never heard it, call 416-745-1820. You can give at www.peteryoungren.org or send your gift to World Impact Ministries at P.O. Box 62039, RPO Victoria Terrace, North York, Ontario, M4A 2W1. Or P.O. Box 433, Winchester, Kentucky, 40392-9800. Together, let's give everyone a chance to know God's love in Jesus Christ.